Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, education lovers. Welcome to the program. So excited to have you here this week on Big Ideas in Education. I'm Ryan Kairalla from Doral College, joined by Dr. Sarah Boulos-Fye from Somerset Academy Schools. Hi, Dr. Sarah Boulos-Fye.
Hi, Ryan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
That is such a magnificent title and name. I run out of breath trying to say it. But definitely warranted, because I know you're bringing some great education stories, and this week's going to be no exception. What do you have for us this week, Sarah?
IdeaStream put out an article with accompanying audio this week that I'm going to share in the description box that highlights the voices of some educators who are learning important lessons from this critical time period. In a piece called What Teachers Have Learned from Pandemic Education, we hear from the voices of several educators who have been working remotely for nearly a full year at this point. Cynthia Rochford, a gifted learning teacher at Portage Path Elementary in Akron, converted part of her basement to replicate her classroom for virtual remote learning. She said, among the many lessons learned and challenges faced, her students' emotional well-being was more important than any curriculum that she could teach. Garth Holman, who teaches social studies at Beechwood Middle School in Beechwood, Ohio, said the pandemic has emphasized that he's teaching a person, not a subject, and has revealed the resiliency of both teachers and kids. In a time when technology is more prevalent than ever, and we're seeing a future of education being ensconced in more tech than ever, there is an argument to be made for a more human schooling environment. For example, Dean of Students Teresa Essendo of Finley Elementary, also in Akron, offered that virtual learning has offered her a unique look into the homes and family lives of her students, which really emphasizes the need to place more value on the emotional lives of students. Not only the academics, she says, quote, but to teach them self-love and self-esteem and independence and innovation, and to teach the student and love the student. These are some really great lessons that I think many of us have been contemplating as we discuss what school will look like as we think about post-pandemic education. What do you think, Ryan?
I love that perspective. What a really cool article. And I love that it reminds us the importance of getting back to what matters, student-centered, student-focused education. And I would say among the people that you brought up there, the one at the end was the one that really kind of rung the most bells for me, because she sort of speaks to how we can still use the virtual platforms that we're using now during the pandemic as a way to get closer to our students. Because obviously the prevailing narrative now is that with all the virtual and all the distance, we're losing our connection to our students and we're losing our humanity. And what I read, or what I heard when reading between the lines of that last speaker, is that virtual learning and the tools that we're embracing now are just that. They're tools. They can be used to foster distance between us and our students, but if used the right way, they can also be used to bring closeness by literally bringing us into our students' homes, by connecting with their personal lives in a way that can really create genuine, powerful bonds between students and teachers and students and parents and all of the stakeholders in a child's education process. And that's certainly the thing that I enjoy most about virtual learning, is how it can be used, if used the right way, to foster closeness.
I think that fostering closeness is important. And as we're talking about a future where we're going back into brick and mortar classrooms in a more traditional sense, the way we have before, I think the conversation continues to be surrounding, now that we have this technology, how are we going to make sure that it stays in the classroom and how best to use it? But I love the idea that these lessons are very different indeed. Like they're taking on a completely different tone. And something I think that has been so critical in the conversation in the past few years with social emotional learning is really focusing on student resilience and student self-esteem, independence, creativity, all of these things. And this is a time period where I think all of that has been tested, and helping students to really feel confident in themselves and their own educational goals, and to be able to empathize and to be able to connect with their classmates and their teachers it's going to be so critical to, as we really transition into that, to have these things at the forefront of that particular educational model.
Because of the pandemic, I think it's easy for us and so tempting for us to be so concerned about this dreaded learning loss, this COVID slide that you see propounded in all the media articles we're reading in education, that it's easy for us to sort of double down on reinforcing content mastery, drill and kill, and that becomes all the more something we're concerned about because of all these news articles that are coming out about the US DOE still requiring testing. And so, it's caused us to get more concerned about the numbers than ever before. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we're going through a pandemic right now. This is a traumatic time. And now's the time for us to be really doubling down on things like SEL and whole child emphasis learning. And I will say that among the chorus of people afraid of the COVID slide, I have heard a lot of voices that are saying, let's not lose track of SEL. This is now more than ever the time for us to get into SEL type things. And we've had a few of those speakers on this program, on the other Academica media programs, and it's a welcome development. Because if there was ever a time to treat the whole child and not just see them as a test score, this is the time.
Absolutely. And when we talk about digital divides and how many students have been left behind, so the conversation about slide and loss of education, I think what we lose with that conversation at times, not always, is those students have also lost connectivity with their teachers, connectivity with their classmates, all of these emotional supports that the physical school building may have provided. So let's make sure that, of course, we're focusing on academics, but again, I love this idea of love. We need to make sure that we're providing love.
And at least
Ryan,
in my own teaching, I can attest that it's definitely affected how I assign and accept assignments on an assignment by assignment basis. I have become, and I think it's a welcome development that I want to carry into my teaching career forevermore, I've become much more accommodating about accepting late work. I used to almost unfairly probe my students when they submitted something late, demanding some sort of viable excuse. And I've become far less of a jerk about that, and understanding that, like, in this world, whether we are lawyers or teachers or students or parents, we could all use a little slack right now. And, and so I've taken that to heart. I think as a silver lining in all this whole saga has made me a lot more empathetic of an educator, a lot more accommodating of an educator. And I intend to carry that with me, because I think my students have responded positively to that. More than ever, students need to see teachers. They need to see teachers, principals, anybody involved in the education process as a port in the storm right now, not an extra burden that children are undergoing amid all the other burdens they're undergoing, but this is the escape that I have. I can come to school and enjoy time with my teacher, and I know I'm going to have a friend there. I'm going to have a mentor there who's going to help me get through this. And part of assuming that role in a time where we really need to assume that role for kids is knowing when to potentially take the foot off the gas a little bit.
Absolutely. I feel like the word I've said more than ever before this year is grace.
Grace.
Have some grace with each other, have grace for ourselves. We are going through, what we're going through right now is life, and we're asking for a little bit more humanity, and we're asking for people to really, let's think about each other. Again, as it was said in this article, a more human school. What is that going to look like when we're treating each other a bit more humanely, excuse me, than what we maybe have done in the past? And that's not a bad thing.
Amen to that.
Ryan, what do you have today? I know you have something you want to excite me with your article today.
I do. We are continuing my popular series of Ryan brings up stories about literacy to make Sarah happy. And it's a very popular series on this show, and I think I got a particularly good one for you here, Sarah.
Let's
because
hear
I'm
it.
all about pandering to my co-host. Class read-alouds are what I'd like to talk about. Class read-alouds are a tried and true method for boosting early elementary students' literacy skills, and they also have the nice added benefit of instilling a love of reading at a young age. Certainly getting read to as a kid, either by my parents or by my kindergarten, first, second grade teacher, I treasure those memories. They made me love reading. But one might ask, do read-alouds still have a place in the later elementary grades and possibly beyond? Well, a growing consensus among literacy experts suggests that they do. A recent article in Edutopia by educator Christy Rogers suggests that read-alouds, normally a staple of the K-3 ELA classes, still have value for older students. Dr. Rogers notes how she used class read-alouds with her 4th and 5th graders. Quote, "There are so many benefits to reading to students of all ages. Reading aloud daily demonstrates a commitment to literacy in an authentic and non-threatening way. Too often, children view reading as an arduous task because teachers have coupled reading with comprehension questions at the end of each chapter." Dr. Rogers also notes how read-alouds with older students build reading proficiency at all ages and also create a sense of community among a class, something that teachers are striving to maintain amid the pandemic. And the benefits of read-alouds don't stop at the elementary grades either. A recent article in Study International notes that middle school, high school, and even college students benefit from hearing books read aloud, as such activities improve comprehension, vocabulary, and pronunciation, and can help students explore difficult or sensitive topics with their classmates. What do you think, Dr. Fire? Read-alouds? I can already see you smiling there.
I love it. And I'm glad that that last part was in there because I was trying not to do a spoiler alert in there that when we're talking about older students, I wasn't just thinking of later elementary students, but I myself have conducted read-alouds with my high school students and middle school students. I also was the beneficiary of read-alouds when I was in high school, and I remember how amazing that was, just being read to by my teacher. Not necessarily, like you said, for the end of chapter questions, but really for the love of literacy. And I'll put something else out there. When you said even to college age students, I think something that has just in the past few years really just exploded is the popularity of audiobooks and Audible, right? And hearing, I feel like, I don't know if everybody is familiar with this, but the narration of stories and even on apps like Calm and some of these other apps that are meant to provide a little bit of therapy, there are celebrities narrating stories for you to listen to as a bedtime story. And it may sound a little silly that adults want a bedtime story read to them, but I think it kind of comes down to the same thing. There is something kind of soothing and therapeutic about it, but there's also something very legitimate about the way that this is being used as an instructional tool to have that love of literacy and that love of language and that modeling of, like you said, vocabulary and pronunciation and all of those things. Sometimes I'll be listening to an audiobook or something, and I'll be listening and I hear a word and I thought, yeah, I didn't know that's how you say that word.
Yeah.
I always, maybe
Yeah.
I've only ever read it on paper, and in my mind it sounded totally different. I thought, wait a minute. So even today, past my K-12 experience, being read to is something that is really helpful. And I have to say, I think I've said it on the show before. If I haven't, I'm putting myself out there. But I have been converted as a former anti-audiobook literacy instructor. There are many of us. If you're listening and you're thinking audio is not reading, I'm here to tell you, I disagree. I've been converted. And I think that the popularity of it and the fact that being able to absorb audio and to really think about what the content is, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever you're listening to, but to really be able to just comprehend and focus on the content can be such a gate opening experience for so many students. And I would encourage educators to think about how we can incorporate read-alouds, audio, things like that a bit more, because I just think that there is a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to language with our students. And if they're not able to decode at a certain level, or if they're not interested at a certain level, read-alouds and audio might really be a way to grip them and to get them interested.
I'm no literacy teacher, Sarah, but it seems to me, and maybe you're going to be taken aback by my presumptuousness here, but it seems to me that the number one job of a literacy teacher, the one thing that you need to teach above anything else with reading, is getting your students to love reading. I feel like if you can get your kids to fall in love with reading, a lot of the other problems with literacy become a lot easier to solve if they don't see reading as a chore, but rather as something they enjoy. And I can't think of a way to get kids to love reading more than to make it a communal experience, to fall in love with the material together. I still have, speaking of older grades read-alouds, some of my happiest memories of school was in my 11th grade AP English class, AP level English class, doing read-alouds of The Sound and the Fury and Streetcar Named Desire, and really complicated pieces of material. Like, I'm not a literature head. Like, these kind of books don't come naturally to me. And if I were just trying to read through Faulkner by myself, it would have zoomed 1,000 feet over my head. It would have been way too hard for me to comprehend. But hearing my, teacher, Mr. Hood, bring these stories to life, or doing a class read aloud so you can actually see how the story's coming together, so that like when you can hear in his voice when the suspense is picking up, and then when there's rising action and falling action, that makes me fall in love with these things. And it got me to read more of those books when I otherwise wouldn't. And I still have memories of, I can't remember if it was either reading Great Gatsby or Streetcar Named Desire as a class read aloud, but one of those two books has a scene where glass breaks. I think it's Streetcar. And every year what he would do is when the students are getting to the scene where they're reading the breaking of the glass and it's this high tension moment, everyone's looking at the book so you can't see what our teacher's doing. He would grab a coffee mug and slam it against the ground as hard as he could and freak us all out.
Wow.
But I'm telling you, he got into these books and he got us all obsessed. And he was the king, by the way, of knowing exactly when to stop for the day. Like, he knew right where the cliffhanger was because he's taught these books 1,000 times, and he would be like, we'd all be getting into it, and he'd be like, all right, let's stop for today, and we'll tackle this tomorrow. It's like, no! But he knew what he was doing. He knew the value of read-alouds to get people to fall in love with reading, and I still remember that stuff to this day.
That's amazing. I can hear the excitement in your voice even as you're reliving that. I mean, I can feel that passion that he instilled in you. And I would say that I think that is the goal of every literacy educator, is to instill that, right? You sow these seeds. And I think what we do as literacy educators is we look for entry points for our students, right? So we can't always guarantee that we're going to have the book that every kid's going to fall in love with, but we look for entry points. And I think that read-alouds is just a beautiful entry point for a lot of students. Whereas, maybe what we're reading, it's not your cup of tea. It's not, I may be very passionate about it. I'm going to try to show you what I think is great about this piece of literature. There's a universality that I want to, impart to you. But really what I'm trying to do is help you find an entry point for your own love of literature, of language, of reading, like you said. And I think this is a really great way to do it. And I love that there's this article out there, because I think it's going to de-kindergartenize, if I can make up a word, the read aloud, and let it be something that we talk about with older students more specifically. So I think a few things just off the top of my head that might make for a more successful read aloud is, make sure you're doing it for a good reason, right? So are you doing this because you're modeling a particular passage? Are you using it maybe to, I can think of when I want a child to get engaged, or if I have a group of students that I'm working with that I really want them to be immersed in something, I might do a little preview read aloud, before we start something, pick a particular paragraph or passage. You mentioned how your teacher knew exactly when to do that moment, that cliffhanger moment to get everybody on the edge of their seats, like, wait, no, don't stop. Every teacher loves that.
It was like Game of Thrones, man. He knew exactly when, every time.
Those are the great moments where you can do something like a read aloud to really do it for a particular purpose. And then don't overuse the read aloud, I would say. Don't overdo it in the sense that don't put all of the reading on yourself as the teacher. If you're talking about a novel that you're reading with your 10th graders, don't try to read the whole thing. I'll tell you from a practical point of view, you're going to lose your voice. I have been there. And even when you have those teacher vocal cord muscles real warmed up, it's probably not going to work really well. But also because it can lose its wonder and its effect a little bit. So I think that those are just off the top of my head some things about read alouds that I would caution, and I would say, because I can keep going. We could talk about this. We could keep going. This could take us all day.
Those are great observations, Sarah. And I know that the folks listening who either are ELA teachers who do read alouds or who, like me, have been on the receiving end of some particularly life-changing read alouds have some thoughts on this, and we encourage you to share them with us. Tweet at us at Academica Media with the hashtag Big Ideas in Education. Let us know your read aloud tips, and let us know your feelings on any of the things that we've discussed today.
I would love to hear from non-ELA educators who are using read alouds, because I know they're out there. I've had some great experiences in classrooms that are non-literacy focused necessarily, and seen some really cool things. So I'd specifically love to hear from some non-ELA teachers.
Right on. Very, very cool. Don't want to disinclude everybody. Let's get everyone in the read aloud party. Sarah, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this with me this week.
Same here, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.